Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, as always, locally, but not in the same place, by Mark Etheridge. We are here to preview the SEC tournament, and I don't know about you, Mark. We both dropped by the park a little bit today, pick up our credentials and get all that stuff out of the way. And there's just something about pulling. Yeah, there it is. There's just something about pulling up to the park and getting inside there that makes you gets you even more excited than you already are. I'm sure you felt the same thing that I did.
Fired up. Joe, I am ready to go, man. I mean, this has been a really good year in the league. You have a lot of great teams at the top. You have some teams that have had some ups and downs, we'll call it, and still have a lot to prove this week. And they're going into it feeling vulnerable. And I think that's interesting, after last year where it was kind of some teams that just had to shoot their shot because this winning the whole thing was the only thing, the only way they were playing in, and everyone else was just playing for seeding, right? And I do think that this year you still have some of that, but you've got a big core of teams in the middle. I mean, Mississippi State's trying to play their way into hosting, and you have all the 13 and 17 teams that I'm sure will go through ad nauseum tonight. And there's so many good storylines, and there are cases for and against, legitimate cases for and against all of these teams. And that's what's going to make this week really interesting, because one of the things, and I don't want to steal the thunder here right away, but one of the things that I really want to focus on is you're not just comparing these SEC teams to each other. I mean, we do that, and it's really, we're kind of drawn to do it because they're on the same field and they're playing one another in some cases, but that's really not what we're doing. We're comparing, and we're having a philosophical debate over if you are a mediocre to less than mediocre team in a great conference versus where does that stand versus being a better than average team or sometimes a really good team in a conference where you really weren't tested, or you weren't tested to anywhere near the extent that the SEC teams were. So how do you gauge that? And there's not really an easy way to do it. We use the RPI. We have all these selection criteria, attributes that we look at, but it's really an art, because there's no right or wrong here. It's what do you value? And that's what's going to make this week, really frustrating for a lot of people, especially people who don't like the power and the consolidation of resources for the SEC, and for that matter, the ACC and some of the Big 12, versus everyone else who's just fighting for scraps. And please let me come to the party. I'm really good, I promise. And that's two different viewpoints that we're going to talk about really all week and probably for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, it's a great call. It is really, if you want to boil it all down to one thing that is kind of the most complicated aspect of where we are in college athletics. Basketball, I'm sure, will deal with this. I mean, for that matter, a 12-team football playoff is probably going to deal with some of this on some level. So, yeah, we are. This is going to be I guess really starting next year is going to be even more interesting when, the SEC obviously adds Texas and Oklahoma, but the Big 12 adds Arizona, and that's a solid program. And Arizona State, obviously, historical program. And what do you do with the Big 10 if Oregon's really good? Yeah, that'll be fascinating. Couple of logistics items to throw out here at the top. See your comments rolling in. Love it. We will, Mark and I are going to do a little bit of a news roundup because there were some newsy things in the league today. We will go through each of the 4 opening round games tomorrow, and then we will circle back through to do some Q&A. So I will try to, if the questions are pertinent, excuse me, I will filter them into our discussion. But if it's something about one of the top seeds that's not playing tomorrow, or if it's like just a bigger picture thing, we will fold those in. So we will get to as many of your questions as we can. But I will try to more artfully fold them in, as opposed to just going one by one down the line there. So hang tight if you don't hear your question right off, and just keep them coming. I'll just keep them collected here in the comments, and we'll just pick them off one by one as time goes on. But quickly, a couple of shout outs here. Ace Man, who is an Aggie, it says gig him. He was in here and got his comment in 25 minutes before we started. So shout out to Ace Man.
Early bird.
Miller, another Aggie says, really better have a strong shirt today. Well, yeah, first of all, Mark has a great shirt. He's got the Nakatomi Plaza. And for all you youngins there, that's a Die Hard reference.
You got to watch that movie, kids.
It's a pretty good one. This is not an endorsement. Trust me when I tell you my shirt is not an endorsement of anything except the fact that my hotel room is cold, which I like. Trust me, I like it. But like it does in moments like this, I have to cover up. I'm wearing a Square Books, Oxford, Mississippi.
In there. Yeah.
Great place. I could spend hours there. Again, not an endorsement of Ole Miss. I'm just cold. And this is one of my favorite sweatshirts. It's very comfortable and fits well. Anyway, our buddy Charlie Sanders says he made it on time. He said he mentioned to me that
we were thinking about you. Yeah.
Yeah. Happy to see you in here, Charlie. James Gillum, a regular commenter on my weekend waypoint, says, "Go Gamecocks, just win and let's not worry about sweating it out." That's the theme of tomorrow, man. Like if you win tomorrow, you can sleep a little bit easier, right? And so that's tomorrow I think is going to be the most important day of the entire tournament. There'll be high quality games as the week goes on, sure, but in terms of stakes, I don't think there's going to be anything more important than tomorrow. Not with the way the field. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt about that. And we will talk about, Mark, you mentioned we've got 5, 13, and 17 teams on the board here. I'm sure we'll talk about this plenty as time goes on. I'm sure we'll get a lot of questions about those teams. But one of the tricky things is not just how does the committee parse, middle of the pack SEC versus very good Sun Belt, just to do a geographic comparison. And Sun Belt's not even a great example because they're a very good league right now. But whatever, they do
have 3 bubble teams.
Right. Pick your middle tier, mid-major league, right? Anyway. But also, we know bid stealers can happen. And even though the metrics are all like we can agree metrics based on precedent, the metrics for all these 13 and 17 teams are pretty doggone good, right? The RPIs are fine. The KPIs are good. The quad records are good for the most part.
Yeah.
It's just that if there's 5 or 6 stolen bids, like there may not be anything you could do about it. And that's the
if the bubble shrinks, yeah, absolutely. Then it's not in your control anymore.
Yeah,
you've played your way into this position, and like it or not, you're going to need some help unless you win the automatic. So, if any of these teams go on an extended run, there won't be that many stolen bids, and you could certainly certainly win your way in. But it's going to be interesting, and I do think one of those things to focus on is it's trying to find out in these leagues that have other bubble teams that are playing. A lot of them are going to play each other, and a lot of them are going to play teams that are either not very good, that's going to hurt their RPI, or they're going to play other good teams in their league, and it may help their RPI. So watching the scoreboard and understanding, hey, this team is really good in the standings, but their RPI is 100. I mean, look at what happened when Mississippi State played Missouri. They went from they won 2 out of 3 and dropped from was it 18 to 24 or whatever it was. So you can tumble, and that's if you fall from 18 to 24 and you're trying to host, that really hurts. That hurts a lot more than 10 to 16, even though it's the same number of places, right? And that's what's going to happen at the bottom of the field too, where you've got teams that, if you're in the top 50 and you drop those 5-6 spots and you're mid 50s now, so those are the things to really focus on if you want to nerd out like we'd like to do.
No doubt. Jasper Pogue on YouTube throws in a woo. He's an Arkansas guy, so that's a woo pig there. So thanks for dropping in, Jasper. He's also a relatively frequent commenter on Weekend Waypoints, as James Gillum, Sean Miller, Charlie Sanders, all those guys are, and Jeremy Scott, of course. Jeremy Scott, probably the most common commenter on Weekend Waypoints here. He's in with a Roll Tide. We'll be there tomorrow to see most of the games and have been going just about every year since 2003. That's a heck of a run, Jeremy.
Yeah.
And that reminds me, I've said this before, but if you happen to see Mark and I running around Hoover, feel free to say hi, because we will be spending some time in the concourse, because we have to walk out the concourse to get upstairs to where we need to go. So you may see us out and about. Now, Mark has a very strict set of rules. You can't look him in the eye, for example. He has to be addressed as Mr. Etheridge.
Yeah, we are two of the friendliest people in the media corps. I can say that in full transparency.
Yeah.
So please come up and talk to us.
Yeah, for sure. Like we'd love to. It's not just that you won't be bothering us. We would love to meet you, actually. So, so if you see us, say hello. Now, I did say this on another show, Mark. Like, if you catch us in the stairwell for some reason as we're heading down to like a press conference,
we may have to be like, for you.
Catch us
we're
later.
working, believe it or not. We're at a ball game, but we are working.
Yeah, catch us later. But if you see us out and about, say hi. We'd love to meet you. All right, Mark, let's and again, if you're just coming in a little bit late, feel free to drop your questions in the comments. We will get to them. I'm just going to try to keep the train on the tracks a little bit. We'll circle back to some of the questions here in a little bit, but let's talk about some newsy items. Awards came out today for the SEC. Not a ton of surprise, generally speaking, I would say. Player of the Year, Charlie Condon. Pitcher of the Year, Hagen Smith. Boy, who could have seen that one coming? Freshman of the Year, Gavin Grahovic. Put a pin in that, because I do have a little bit of a conversation point about that. And then Coach of the Year, Nick Mingione. Any of those surprise you? Anything you disagree with there, Mark? What do you think?
No, I mean, they're all great. They've all had great years. That's probably who I would pick as well. I mean, there's certainly a lot of candidates. I mean, Player of the Year, I mean, in a normal year, Caglione wins it. But, they didn't have a great year on the field. It wasn't his fault. I mean, he was really good.
He did about all he could, yeah.
Right. But yeah, Charlie Condon had a generational year. And of course, Hagen Smith is the best pitcher in the country. So you knew that was going to happen. And Mingione, I mean, we didn't expect them to win the SEC. And look at the season they've had. I mean, it's been incredible. So this is a two-year run he's had that's just, off the charts. I mean, this is transformational for that program. And and Grahovic's going to be a superstar. I think the only, there are some other freshmen who've had big years. I mean, Justin LeBron at Alabama, he didn't start, as good as Grahovic did, but boy, at the end of the year, I mean, he's probably he and Gage Miller, who somehow didn't make the team, are two of the best players in the conference. And so I could see why some people might think, LeBron should have had some run for that.
Yeah, that's the other one. Now, I don't have any problem with Grahovic. Like, he's had a great year. But I also would not have minded Justin LeBron being the winner there. Just playing shortstop, I think, adds a little bit to it. I also think it's impressive, whether this should matter or not, I don't know, but I also think it's impressive. Like, he did hit a little bit of a slump in the middle of the season, and he, to your point, fought through it. And that's a hard thing to do when you're playing more games than you ever have. You're playing better players than you ever have. You're probably failing for the first time ever as a baseball player, right? And to fight through that and have a good second half is impressive for a first-year player. So I'm with you. I don't have any sort of issue. Some folks on one of my Weekend Waypoint shows made a good point that, if you just isolate SEC stats, Christian Moore might have had a case, right? He led the league in conference play and average and home runs, and obviously he's been incredible. But I'm with you generally that we're talking a generational type season for Charlie Condon. And maybe we're in the type of offensive environment where next year somebody hits 35 home runs. I don't know. We'll have to see. But for right now, I mean, he's having the best power hitting year that we've seen in a long, long time, certainly in the BB Core era. And so I don't know that anyone can have any real gripe with Charlie Condon.
Yeah. He's got a real shot at 40. It depends on how far they go. But, if he gets a few games in Hoover and a few games in a regional and a few games in a super, he's going to hit 40.
Well, especially now that they're hosting, they're likely hosting. Actually, they're hosting. Let me just take the likely out of it. Now that they're hosting in that ballpark, against a 4 seed, right? Like that could get now
If they
that he
pitch
may
to him.
also
Yeah.
right. He might get walked the first couple times, but if it's in a situation where they're up 12-2 and so they stop walking him because it's like, well, what does it matter? Let's let this poor kid out here give him a chance to say he got Charlie Condon out. Let's pitch to him. So yeah, he could get 40. That you're right that he has a very real chance. I will also plug here. We're going to make you go listen to the episode or read it online. But new Field of 64, new Nerdcast. So if you really want to kind of get into the nitty gritty of that, if you want to see the whole picture, go listen to that. Go read that. We won't give you. Obviously, we'll talk about it from an SEC standpoint as we go on here. But if you want the whole picture, you'll have to go find it there. But I wanted to make sure to plug that. Other news, Mark. They're going to be using a double base at the SEC tournament.
Yeah.
What was your
comment?
No, like I got that email today and was like, yeah. Now there have been some, not many, but some examples this year of teams using double bases. That is something you could do. Not many chose to do it. So I was surprised to see it.
Yeah.
What was your reaction though? Beyond the surprise, what's your reaction?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it looks goofy. It's not what, especially us old guys are used to seeing the field look the same way, and anything that, I still don't like the shift, and that's been around a decade now. So I get it. I get that it looks weird. But you know what else sucks? Is when people get hurt with collisions at first base, and this should mitigate, if not, totally avoid those. And I want to see the best players play. I don't want them to get hurt. So I do think that, being able to give that additional space to avoid a collision, that's worth, us old guys feeling a little bit uncomfortable, right? I think it's probably a wash.
Yeah. For me, that is probably the most important thing they're trying to do here. I despise, and I understand why it's a rule. So I'm not necessarily railing against the rule, but I despise how often it seems like important parts of games get decided by a runner's interference rule, where they're like 8 inches out, inside the line, and a catcher's throw caroms off his back.
Yep.
And it wasn't a good throw anyway, but because the runner was not in his lane, that he's out.
Yeah.
So this should, it's not going to keep anybody from running inside the lane necessarily, but at least it gives the runner something to aim for on the outside of the where the first baseman's at. So I do think this mitigates some of that, because that's always just so irritating to me.
Agreed.
Because so often the result of the play was not necessarily because of the interference. It was a bad throw as it was, or the angle was just tough and it was never going to be a good throw. But it ends up, the defense ends up getting bailed out just because the runner was not quite in the right place.
Yeah. I agree. That's an excellent point.
All right. So that's that. Let's, unless you have any other sort of logistical or news item, Mark, we can get into looking at Tuesday's games. How does that sound?
Let's do it.
All right. So we're going to look at Tuesday's games real quick. We're not going to get too weedsy on this, especially because, the games start in, 14 hours or so, 15 hours. So the information will expire pretty quick, but we'll run through them, kind of get you ready for them, maybe give you an idea of where our feel is for this. And again, if you're just joining us, I see comments rolling in. Keep them coming. We'll get to your questions. Just going to talk a little bit about the bracket itself first, then we'll circle back on some questions and some bigger picture stuff. First game on the day, Mark. Georgia LSU. Probably couldn't ask for a more fun game to start off the day with.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit of a departure from last year, and no disrespect to these teams, but the first game last year was a Georgia team that was like running on fumes. They pitched guys in that game that had thrown 5 innings last year. Don't quote me on that, but they had nothing left.
Yeah.
In a South Carolina team that also was running on fumes, but was just a better team. And the game was like 9-1 or something. Like, it just was not and of course this game might not be good, but at least on paper, this looks like a lot of fun. A Georgia team that's played really well the second half, an LSU team coming off of a sweep, feeling pretty good about itself.
Yeah.
It sounded a little, Koki Riley, who writes for The Advocate, covers LSU, kind of made it sound a little like LSU might be looking at starting Gage Jump in this game. and bringing him back for it. I have not looked again. I did not see a Georgia starter just yet. But Mark, while you're giving your thought on this game, maybe I'll look that up. But Gage jump versus anybody would Gage jump
Georgia's
against the
offense.
Georgia offense,
Yeah.
right? And then versus whoever on the mound for Georgia is going to be interesting. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and that's always the question, right? Yeah, especially these quick turnaround games. Well, what do you bring your best guy back? How much did he throw? On Thursday or Friday? I've seen that happen a couple times. And what do they have left? Some guys really respond well on short rest. They come in and they pitch great. Others really labor with it, and of course, people are always going to question you when you bring a guy back on short rest, especially this short a rest. So, but Jay Johnson doesn't have anything to prove. So, he's able to go out and do that. I do think the question for me is, Georgia has rolled through and they just continue to find guys on the mound who can help you. And so I don't know who they'll throw, but I imagine we'll see a lot of arms for both sides. Is they just kind of both teams want to go all out. Georgia wants to make sure that they get that top 8 seed. We had them projected as the last 8, so obviously that's very vulnerable depending on what other teams around the country do. And that some of the teams they're competing against, aren't staring at what Kentucky and Arkansas in your bracket. Okay, so that's that's going to be challenging when you need wins. You don't need RPI points. Your RPI is great. So I think that's interesting. And then LSU, they played they were up against the wall. They played their way into this position. They got to that 13 win threshold, and now all anybody can talk about is, well, that's not enough because there are 5 13-win teams, and you can't put them all in. Well, if there was only one of these 13 and 17 teams, and the other 4 were like 10 and 20 or whatever, we wouldn't be having this discussion, right? They would just be in because that's the precedent. So that's going to be fascinating this week, just to see, who can help their case. And then also, is it enough, right? You go out and have you already done enough? And we don't know that answer. And 2, how much, if you go out and you win one more, is that it? Can you, even though you're going to take 2 losses, perhaps, is that good enough? And so it's all these good questions from a bracketology standpoint. And then you got the on the field stuff. So LSU's coming in feeling great about themselves. They played, even the series they lost at Alabama, they should have won that series. They had that 9th inning meltdown, or else they win their last 5. Okay. For me, I think LSU is in the field. I think if they lose to Georgia tomorrow, they're still in the field. And I'll tell you why, because I think LSU can win a regional, because they're going to throw Jump and Holman 1 and 2, and they'll match up with anybody you want to throw out there, right? Any two guys. Obviously, there's teams with at least one starter that may trump them. But for 2, that's really good, right? And then that puts them in a position where you try to win with offense and you mix and match in the 3rd game, which is probably what we're going to see. Should they advance Tuesday, we're going to see a whole lot of arms, right, as they try to figure out who can help them next week. From a Georgia standpoint, I mean, I just want to see them swing it. I mean, I saw them at A&M. They hit pretty good there. I guess you could say that about any game, but they did. And just to get a chance to see not just Charlie Condon, but that lineup is deep and impressive, and I just fired up to see it, because a lot of times you don't have 2 teams that are playing at their peak, and you match up in the very first game of the tournament. So just so fired up.
Yeah, I think I'm most fascinated in how does Georgia's offense play in a bigger ballpark. Now, the Hoover Met's not a graveyard.
It used to be. They've moved the fences in. Yeah.
Right. But also the game is at 10:30 local. Like, is the ball flying that early in the day? It is going to be warm, but not crazy, and I think the ball probably flies better at a 2:30 start or a 5:30 start or whatever they are. So we'll see. But can LSU keep the ball in the ballpark? Like, I think that's going to be a lot of what it boils down to, because if you can't keep Georgia in the ballpark, you're going to have a bad time, basically. So ask basically anybody
Everyone.
on their schedule. Yeah. So yeah, I'm with you. Excited about this one. Next one on the schedule is Alabama, South Carolina, and my worry is primarily with South Carolina in this game, because they're starting Dylan Eskew, which that in and of itself, like, among the, he's a pretty solid arm. However, I don't know, with South Carolina's issues in the bullpen, this just doesn't feel the Tuesday game in a game where, look, Alabama, when it's swinging it well, is pretty good. It's not on the same level as Tennessee or A&M or Georgia when they're swinging it well, or even throw Kentucky into that mix. But it's a pretty doggone good offense when they're swinging it well. And I just don't know if South Carolina is prepared to win this kind of party. The Tuesday game where you're going to have to probably put 5 or 6 guys in the mound. And if you're Carolina, like, I get it. They can throw Veach and Gainey, and they've got guys they can patch it together with. But what happens if Eskew, what happens if South Carolina is down 4-0 after 2? Like, the combination of, can you come back enough? Because, oh, by the way, the bottom half of Carolina's lineup you can pitch to, right? You love Messina and Petrie, but what do they get after that is a question for me. So, so for me, that's kind of the thing, is South Carolina going to be able to match up on the mound and do enough? Now, it's not like Bama's sitting there with, just this vaunted bullpen, but they are starting Greg Ferrone, and depending on how good he's feeling and how rested he's feeling, like, if he's on his game, like, he's been really good this year. So he's the type of guy that even on short rest, you feel like could give Bama 4 or 5 solid innings, and that might be enough if South Carolina can't patch it together on the mound effectively.
Yeah, I do think that's it's a fascinating matchup. With Eskew, he started Saturday, right? Am I remembering that correctly?
This past weekend?
Yeah.
And only went like 2 innings. Like, I think it was a designed short start.
Yeah, just an opener. Yeah. So so that'll be interesting too. You coming back, a big moment. South Carolina has to be feeling like, we've lost 6 games in a row. We were thinking we were going to host, and here we are feeling very vulnerable. All these smart guys on D1 baseball are saying that you probably better win so that you don't have to sweat it out on Monday. And that's true. I do think that with what they did so early in the year, it built up some equity. But there's kind of this undercurrent out there that all these SEC teams are just mediocre because of their conference record. And if you just judge things on the way that we've always judged them for 100 years, you needed to do well in your conference to be considered a good team. And I do think that this is going to require a mind shift as we move into the new millennium here, of all of super conferences and all of the resources being consolidated, and because of that, conference records are going to mean less than they did in the past, because all of these top teams are playing each other, and it's zero sum. Somebody wins, somebody loses. So you could be a really good team and just have an okay record. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing with this. And the question is, well, where do you draw the line, right? What is enough? When did you do enough? Because anybody can lose to a good team. You need to win some of those games. And the question is, well, okay, how many did you win? And how many is enough? And I think that's where South Carolina is, for that matter. Alabama might be too. I mean, Alabama's got some really good series wins, but they have struggled on the road. I mean, they won one road series all year against Ole Miss and lost the rest. And they've got some really good. They beat Tennessee, they beat Arkansas, they beat South Carolina. They LSU. I mean, they beat some good teams. So and they would be dangerous in a regional because they have 3 starters. That they feel good about. So, that's that's kind of the way I see that game. I honestly don't know how to break it down. I think I'd probably favor Alabama, but it's it's a shaky nod.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd flip a coin on this one,
Yeah.
honestly. Like that's kind of where I'm at, which was what makes it fun.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also what'll make it stressful for fans of the two teams.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, third game of the day. So starting the evening session, we're going to have Friday on a Tuesday, Mark. Shout out to Jacob Rudner, who said that to me earlier today when the starters came out. Bryce Cunningham for Vanderbilt, Pierce Capola for Florida. I don't know about you, Mark. I've seen Pierce Capola pitch on TV. This is my first time seeing him in the flesh, if you will. So, that'll be exciting. And I'm kind of fascinated to see what they get from him, because obviously he's still on a pretty tight leash, just given his we have a special guest jumping in here. Let's see how disruptive he's going to be. Well, hello, Kendall.
What's up, gentlemen?
How's it going, my friend?
It's going well. So it's kind of funny. I don't know how we didn't think about this in the Nerdcast. So I was talking to a Mississippi State source a minute ago about their hosting chances. And do you guys happen to remember the old suspension gate? I had totally forgotten about that. The deal where, was it Johnny Long? The deal at home plate where they ejected all those people and then put them back on the field the next day, but State lost that game. They ejected everybody.
Right.
Like, that could be the difference between them hosting and not hosting.
That one game. Yeah.
I didn't even think. I totally.
They would have swept Georgia. Yeah.
They would have swept Georgia. Like, I had totally forgotten about that until this person brought it back up.
I mean, you don't know that they would have won that game.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a close
game. I would have liked your chances over the walk-ons.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. But Georgia lost some guys too. But it seemed like Mississippi State's losses were worse. There's no doubt about that. So yeah, that is interesting. I had not considered that would be the difference, perhaps.
I also felt better about their chances compared to guys you could have picked up at a walk-ons in addition to the actual walk-on. Kendall, real quick, we were talking about, so we're working our way through the Tuesday games. We're on the third one right now, Vanderbilt, Florida. Going with Cunningham versus Capola. We were just talking about how we haven't seen Pierce Capola in the flesh, or I haven't this season, so I'm looking forward to that, and just don't know what to expect with how long the leash is going to be with him, or for Cunningham when we're talking about short rest, but at least on paper, a good pitching matchup in that one.
Yeah, for sure. You got to – I mean, both guys had to be on a pretty strict pitch count, right? What were the pitch counts over the weekend?
You think so? I can look it up, but you'd think so.
No, that's no big deal.
Capola didn't go that long. I mean, I think he went like 40, 45 pitches, something like that.
It just goes to show you like how important this game is to both coaches. I mean, I think, Vanderbilt's essentially starting its ace against Florida. That gives you an idea of where Tim Corbin kind of feels their team is. And honestly, like, I kind of feel like Vanderbilt really maybe even more so than Florida, really needs to win. I mean, if you look at Vanderbilt's last 4 weekends, the committee, and I get it. I've talked to a couple of coaches today that have talked about how it should be about the overall resume and not how you finish. But, like, recency bias is real, man, with a committee. And if you put, for instance, LSU and Vanderbilt side by side, Vanderbilt won a series in Baton Rouge a few weeks ago, or a couple months ago. But when you look at the trajectory of those two teams over the last month, I mean, it's a stark contrast. So recency bias is real, and I think for Vanderbilt, they need to win tomorrow to at least give the committee some sort of positive vibe going into Selection Monday.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's well said. One other thing to think about with Vandy playing Florida, remember the last time they played? What happened in the final game of the series with J.D. Thompson, and then Sully notices some dark spots on the forearm there, and
I'd forgotten about that too.
Brings it to the umpire's attention, and next thing you know, boom. Yeah, I mean, it's so and these are two close friends. Obviously, there's not a lot of heat there, but but you don't like that when that happens. You don't want to have to do it if you're Sully, and certainly you don't want to go through that if you're Corbin, right? So it's just one of those weird deals. Oh, we got another guest here.
Mississippi State could have used Steven Schock in that game where everybody got suspended.
That was the real goal. Oh, my microphone. I'm not hearing you.
Shock, aren't you an adopted Mississippi State Bulldog?
What? Shock is working through some technical issues. Steve, thumbs up if you're good.
Adjusted.
Good.
Okay,
we
are
all right,
good.
great.
My apologies.
Shock, aren't you an adopted Mississippi State Bulldog?
Yeah, I think so. I believe so. The amount of food they fed me, I'm not too familiar with the adoption process, but from the film Stuart Little, I would believe that I have been adopted. They came to one of my sporting events in the past, which seems like Stuart had the boat race. The parents were there. But yeah, so I think so.
At the very least, you could just portal over there because everyone else does.
Yeah, and with the NCAA, it's just, hey, do what you want.
Right.
That's a good segue, Mississippi State, because our last game, Steve, to catch you up, we're working our way through the first 4 games for tomorrow. The last one, you're just in time, though, for the last one, which is State and Ole Miss. And I don't care if you're from, Starkville, Oxford, South Haven, Tupelo, Meridian, wherever you're from in the state of Mississippi. That's right. Yeah, shout out to, I heard an Itabena reference in there. I heard you. Shout out to Mississippi Valley State. Put the children to bed is what I'm saying, no matter where you are in the state. Steve, why don't you go first since you're the newest guest on this show? So we've got Brooks Auger on the mound for State, Riley Maddox on the mound for Ole Miss, 2 pretty good arms for those teams. Steve, what do you think about that nightcap? Whether it's real analysis or just vibes, what do you got?
I think just vibes-wise, shout out to the state of Mississippi. This is a huge matchup for you. I think everyone in Mississippi is a winner in the fact that this is an incredible matchup, and it's, one of the biggest stages we can see these 2 teams competing on. And, the stakes couldn't really be higher for Ole Miss. I feel like if they make a run in the tournament, that's really their one shot to keep the vibes high and keep playing with each other. Otherwise, it's, hey, have fun at summer ball, or, welcome to your job in finance or insurance, depending on which path a lot of guys go. Yeah. So, and of course, there's the professional baseball opportunities. That part happens too, obviously. But I think that's really the most interesting time of the season, and when you get to watch the most compelling baseball. And, I would be amiss to speak of compelling baseball and say I did not just come back from watching the Penn Quakers win the Ivy League tournament. Smart and goodest in the Ivy League at baseball. You kidding me? So shout out to the Quake Show. Got to mix that in. But I'm really excited about the chances for Mississippi State to really get themselves into that hosting, cement themselves as hosts. Because, dude, it was very cool. I would love to go back there and eat food. And I can't justify doing that if there's no baseball games happening there. So yeah,
that's fair. You just walk up to Duty Noble on a Tuesday in August. It's probably not going to be the same type of experience. We side note though, we got 2 tickets punched today, right? Penn and Army.
Penn and Army. Yeah. The Quake Show's back. Penn, Joe, if you remember, gave everybody all they could handle in that Auburn regional last year.
They did. Yeah. I was there for that actually. That was Penn Quake. Shout out to the Quake Show. Wyatt Hensler, by the way, I've mentioned this. If you're an A&M fan or just an SEC fan in general, Wyatt Hensler for Penn is a real dude, and unless he goes off to pro ball, which is a possibility, he'll be at A&M next year. And so that guy is, I believe he's Penn's single season home run leader, maybe Ivy League season home run leader
today.
Okay,
all right. He hit his 22nd.
How about that? Yeah, and in the Ivy League plays 35 games, so that's kind of impressive. They don't play 56.
You got to get them in.
Mark, what do you got on as Mark just reduced his age by 15 years roughly?
Oh yeah, I just got to fit in.
Mark's gonna get ID'd in a restaurant.
Shock, I believe you're supposed to turn your hat around.
Oh, sorry.
Company
policy. Program, guys. Be cool like that.
Aerodynamics.
Company policy.
Mark's ID. Mark, what do you got on this tomorrow's finale, the State and Ole Miss? What are you thinking about going into that game?
Yeah, there's really 2 storylines for me. One is Mississippi State's trying to play their way into hosting. They're trying to improve their RPI. They got to do more than win tomorrow, but you can't win the next game unless you win tomorrow. So that's the first thing. The second thing is in the other dugout. What's Mike going to do? If tomorrow is it, does he decide, to ride off in the sunset with his national championship trophy and not put up with this BS anymore? It's the toughest league in the country, and it's a gauntlet every week, and he's been very successful. He didn't have to do this if he didn't want to. But, you've been successful for this long, it's hard to walk away. So maybe he wants to get this thing figured out. And I think that's going to be interesting, with the direction of Ole Miss, because this will be 2 years in a row that they won't make the postseason.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of feel like when you look at Ole Miss and frankly Mike Bianco's career, I think he's one of those guys that he's had such a I get the last 2 years have been iffy, but I mean, he's had such a decorated career at Ole Miss. It would surprise me a little bit if he just retired tomorrow and said, this is it. I think the more likely scenario, in my opinion at least, just total guess, honestly, is that he announces he's retiring or something like that, and he has one more year. That, to me, that would make the most sense for Mike Bianco. And let's not forget, if he steps away, he's leaving behind like $1.7 million next year. So, I mean, I don't know about you, but if I had another year left on my deal and it was $1.7 million, I can deal with getting my head beat in the SEC for one more year. So,
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. I mean, Ole Miss could actually be pretty good next year. But at any rate, yeah, I mean, I don't think this is it for him. But if it is, what a hell of a career at Ole Miss. I mean, to turn that not only turn that program into what it was, but beer showers, Swayze, etc. It's the way it is now because of what he built.
Right.
If Ole Miss does lose tomorrow night, we nominate Kendall to ask Mike Bianco that question about whether.
I am not going to.
I got it.
Chase Parham's on the case.
Chase will be there. Yeah, that's true.
I will say this about Mississippi State, though. The question will be, can the Dogs host? And what's really interesting is, we debated Mississippi State at length on the Nerdcast. We ended up going with Oklahoma State over Mississippi State. But what's really interesting is if Mississippi State wins tomorrow, but let's say they lose, they go 0-2 in the double elimination format. They go 1-2. It'll be interesting to me to see how the committee views them, because it sounds like the committee is going to put some pretty solid value on the KPI. And if you look at the RPI, they're 23 today. If they beat Ole Miss, I mean, the thing about Ole Miss that's crazy is they're not going to make the postseason, but like their RPI is pretty good. So I mean, if they win tomorrow at a neutral site venue, they're probably going back into the top 20. And guess what? Mississippi State, guys, is already 12 in the KPI. So you almost kind of wonder if they win tomorrow and they're in a top 19, 18 team in the RPI, because they're not going to get penalized much from losing. Who would they play if they win? They play A&M. If they lost to A&M, they're not. It's not like losing to the number one RPI team is going to drop them 3 spots. So if they win tomorrow and their KPI remains that high, I mean, does it really matter after tomorrow if they win? I mean, I think there's a lot of factors, but that's kind of where my thinking is a little bit.
Yeah, where they are, they're not in a place where they control their destiny right now, unless they just go off and get till Saturday or something. So it's going to be dependent on what Oak State does, what Wake Forest does, what I don't know, some other teams that are Arizona perhaps that could kind of win their way in. They're going to push people out, and if you're Mississippi State, you're not really trying to. And people, I love this question: what does Mississippi State need to do to host? Right. So there's just some magic number. If it's 1, if it's 2, if it's 3. No, you need to do whatever you can to be evaluated better than the teams that you're competing for that host spot with. Right. And you might be ahead of some of them. You might be behind some of them. So it's a moving target based on what everyone else does, because you don't control it anymore.
Mark, can I give you a caveat? If Mississippi State wins the SEC tournament, they're going to host.
That's the only way, right? I mean,
if Mississippi State got to Saturday, they're hosting.
Probably so, yeah. And it's all going to depend on where the RPI is. And you would think if they won that many games, it would be mid-teens at least, and that would be enough.
And if Mississippi State is hosting, Stephen Schock will be there hosting a weenie roast or something. I think that's
pulled pork, duck poppers.
Yeah. Okay.
It's just so much.
Yeah.
So much.
I do want to say high volume play. Go ahead, Steve.
I don't think Bianco will hang him up after this season, just because, $1.7 million, that's a lot of money. Sure. that he'd be missing out on. But also think about all the fishing rods, all the different gifts he gets when he goes, hey, you know what? Next year's the year. Then, you're getting guitars. You're getting people are essentially picking out your retirement hobby for you. Like,
yeah,
I believe A&M is already building the boots that he'll receive in College Station.
That's a great point. He's going to make $1.7 million in prizes, like a game show.
Yeah, look at Gary Gilmore, man. That guy's going to have a room with all of his gifts.
Yeah.
I've watched him get like 3 separate fishing rods.
Yeah, and I know this is an SEC show, but that Sun Belt tournament should be interesting with all those bubble teams, man. That's going to be
I plan on so since we're on an SEC podcast, I'll also mention this. I plan on going down to the Sun Belt for at least a couple of games on Wednesday, and just kind of pick and choose some games. Obviously, see Coastal. James Madison. I kind of want to see, frankly, Fenwick Trimble for James Madison. If you go look at his numbers, just awesome power numbers. I really want to see him. So. Yeah, I'm going to kind of flip-flop back and forth. We'll see how far I can or how quick I can make it from Montgomery to Hoover without breaking too many traffic laws.
There you go.
I came through there today.
Oh, wow.
Did you break any traffic laws?
Don't ask, don't tell.
I'm going to advise my client not to answer that. All right, quickly, before we get to Q&A here, if you're just joining us, keep your comments and questions coming. We will get to them. But real quick, there's 4 of us here, which is perfect. So we're going to talk about the top 4 seeds of this tournament real quick. I'm going to assign a team to each of you, and you tell me why we think that team could win it all in this field. Steve, you were at Texas A&M recently. Tell us a little bit about the Aggies, and tell us why you think Texas A&M could win the SEC tournament.
So the way that they will win, or if they do win, what they'll need to do is hit home runs. I unfortunately was there for 2 days in which they did not do that. I believe I saw one, but from what has been advertised and what has been, apparent on Twitter is everybody does it. As soon as I took off my flight on Saturday when I was going back home, they started doing it again. So the way for them to win is for me not to see any of it happen in person. I think that's truly the way it's going to go. But, with Ryan Prager on the mound, watching him pitch this weekend, everybody talks, Hagen Smith is one of the best pitchers in college baseball. Sure. Ryan Prager was right up there with him this weekend. And so if their pitching is clicking, like when they're on as a pitching staff, they're like lights out. Like Coach Max Wiener has done an incredible job with them. But it's a matter of making sure their pitching and hitting is firing at the same time because, when they were the number 1 team in the nation, when they were ranked first overall, it's because they were firing on all cylinders. And then, they kind of stay in the top 10 because they have all of that upside. It's just a matter of them playing to that upside.
Kendall, tell us why Tennessee could win this tournament.
Well, I think history would suggest, right? If you think back to the Fab team they had a couple of years ago, they had a national seed locked up, and they came here and went through this thing and won the tournament as well that year. So, Tony V, if he's playing the game of baseball, he's playing the game of baseball to win. And I think when you look at Tennessee overall, and frankly, you can kind of throw A&M in this mix too. But when you look at Tennessee overall, it's going to be, I'm gonna knock on wood here. It's supposed to be sunny and a little bit breezy, and that is very conducive to a lot of home runs of the Met. It's kind of funny, the Met, I feel like until the last few years played kind of very pitcher friendly, but I feel like you can hit bombs in this place now. Yeah. And as long as the weather cooperates, this could be a very homer friendly week in the SEC tournament. I think if that is the case, then teams like Tennessee, teams like A&M can really benefit. So when you look at the balls, just Blake Burke's home run over the weekend is still going. I have not seen a home run hit this year, guys, that like you lost it in the camera, like it literally got lost in the darkness in center field. Like just that lineup, Christian Moore, he's going to be amped up after. Granted, Charlie Condon deserved the national or the SEC Player of the Year award, but Christian Moore had certainly a great case. He's going to be amped up a little bit. So the Vols are going to come here to play, and I think as long as they play the same brand of baseball they've kind of played down the stretch, they can make a run through here. That's kind of the scoop on the Vols. Very similar to A&M, actually.
That's a good case. Mark, tell us about Arkansas and why you think they could win.
Well, in order to win the conference tournament, you better be able to pitch and you better be able to have a whole lot of arms to last all through Sunday. And anybody else in the country got as many good arms as Arkansas? Probably not. I mean, it's a short list if anyone does. So I do think that, the other part of this is you're going to have one day for 6 or 7 innings where nobody scores any runs because that's Smith Day. So if you get to that, I mean, that really shortens all the innings that you need to fill for the rest of the tournament. So, there's always questions about the offense, but I think the offense is going to be fine. It's solid throughout. They do have some options they can mix and match, and if everyone's healthy, which has been a big if this year, Arkansas, I really think they're going to make up for last year where they really struggled in the regional where they just didn't throw enough strikes. This is the focus. It's postseason time now. They're going to flip that switch, and I wouldn't be surprised if they won. They walk out of Hoover with the trophy.
Yeah, and I'll add this real quick, Joe. Sorry, I know you're going to talk about UK, but real quick on the Hogs. 2 things that I kind of took away from the A&M series I thought were interesting for the Hogs pitching wise is what's his name, Gage. I'm drawing a blank on the last name. Wood, is that right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know why I was thinking of Gage Miller. My bad. Gage Wood got off to a little bit of a slow start against A&M, but really settled down and had a nice start against the Aggies the rest of the way up to the first inning, about inning and a half after giving up that home run. I was really encouraged by that. The other thing for me is Mason Molina. It was kind of interesting. You can kind of read about this in the story I wrote after the Hudson White Mason Molina game that they clinched SEC West in. But, Van Horn talked about how, Mason Molina, like the outing he had out of the bullpen was huge for them moving forward. Like they had, if you look at his 2 appearances in May, they were not very good. And, DVH basically said, like, hey, like, we need to give him a shot in this environment to see that if he can deliver in the month of May. And he went out there against one of the better lineups in the country and pitched really, really well. The velo was up to 94, 95 from the left side. And so my takeaway from that weekend was Gage Wood and Mason Molina. And certainly, as Mark just pointed out, those 2 guys especially are going to be very key in the regional and certainly could be very key throughout the rest of the week. I'm just very curious to see how these teams manage everything when they have national seeds locked up. Like, I mean, are they going to treat, especially these early games on like Wednesday, like, are they just going to treat them with like whole staff days? I'll be very curious to see how they do it.
Well, I really want to see some of these guys get extended because you see Arkansas, they'll bring in a guy and he looks amazing for an inning and then he leaves and they go to the next one and the next one and they go through into the game. I'd like to see some of these guys stretched out, and I think that's what we'll get a chance to view this week.
On the Kentucky side of things, I think the biggest thing they have going for them is that this is still a program that's striving for things like A&M, Arkansas, Tennessee. Like, I don't want to say it's old hat, but these are teams that have been to Omaha recently. They've challenged for SEC titles. They've been considered national title contenders. A lot of this is new for Kentucky. And so I think they want to fill the trophy case a little bit. Like, they've never won an SEC tournament. So I think that would be a big deal for them. And also, much like Tennessee, like, I just don't think Kentucky has an off switch in terms of the competitiveness. Like, I just think they just go out there and they just play hard and they're goofy and they're silly about it and they just like to have fun. And I just don't think that's going to stop just because they're here in Hoover and it's like, okay, well, we're going to be a top 8 seed. We've got that locked up. I just don't think they can turn that off. I think the other thing I would say is that they don't, and this could be interpreted as a good or bad thing, because if Kentucky doesn't play well this week, I think it's probably because they struggle to find the right pieces on the mound in their matchups. Their bullpen scares me the way it's pitched a little bit of late. But the flip side of that is they don't really have to have a specific formula on the mound. Some of these teams have to have certain things go right for them to win games on the mound. Kentucky's kind of used to having to play where they just throw a bunch of guys out there and just try to figure it out on the fly. And sometimes some teams panic when they get in that type of situation. I think Kentucky's just going to shrug their shoulders and just, it's just kind of how we play. I think that can be an asset. So I think the beauty of it is I don't think we'd be shocked if any of those 4 teams end up winning the whole thing.
Yeah, what's really funny about Kentucky is I kind of go back to, it was actually a negative moment for them, but a couple of weeks ago I was watching the Florida series, and the bullpen just wasn't very good against the Gators in a couple of those games. And I kind of go back, and this is like a microcosm of what this program's all about to some degree, is like I kind of feel like they're always playing with house money, or at least they always feel like we're Kentucky, like people don't expect us to be in this position. Because I go back to one of the games against Florida, and they were just melting down on the mound, and Minge goes out to the mound, and like you can tell the dude's just like cracking jokes with all the players, like all the players are laughing, he's giggling, and like I just thought like in that moment in that situation, like I thought that was just what this program's all about. Like they're just very loose, man. Like I'm not saying they don't take things seriously, but like like it's almost like they're just rolling like Joe just mentioned, they're just rolling the ball out there and going to play some baseball. And there's great value in that, whatever, postseason, conference tournament, etc.
Yeah, these are pressure-filled games, and it just doesn't feel like they're a team that really cares about that. We'll see as these games get bigger. But all right, let's plow through some questions here. And Steve and Kendall, feel free at some point. This is Mark and I.
I'm gonna tap out real quick. I got to take a phone call.
All right, man.
We'll see you all tomorrow.
Kendall, appreciate you joining us. We'll see you tomorrow. At
Thanks, fellas. See you later, Shocker. Where are you headed tomorrow?
Tomorrow I'm heading to Charlotte, North Carolina for the Atlantic Coast Conference. Oh, I can't say that here. For a tournament.
Do me a favor. Hey, do me a favor. Keep Fit out of the M&M jar.
No, I'm gonna feed Fit. I wanna see how many he can eat. I want to set a record.
Give him
He's like a $140. How many can he eat?
Yeah.
That's the answer to the question.
All right, man. Safe travels. We'll see the SEC boys tomorrow.
All right.